Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep on industrial policy, specifically a new document from Andhra Pradesh, India. You're interested in how this policy incentivizes private industrial parks, so let's break down what it all means.
Yeah, it's pretty ambitious, actually. The document outlines how Andhra Pradesh wants to become a global manufacturing hub, and that's kind of a shift for a region not traditionally known for heavy industry.
I'm seeing this phrase plug and play everywhere. What does that even mean when we're talking about industrial parks? It sounds kind of too good to be true.
It's definitely marketing speak, but there is some substance behind it. So plug and play basically means these parks will have all the necessary infrastructure already set up. So roads, power, water, even telecom. So businesses can get set up quickly and easily without all the usual headaches.
So no more months of bureaucratic approvals and permits. That itself could be a huge incentive for companies who want to get up and running fast. But wouldn't this create intense competition for businesses that are already in Andhra Pradesh? How would they handle all these new companies coming in?
That's a good point. The policy does say they need to support existing industries while promoting new growth. There are some things in there for financial assistance and skills development programs to help traditional businesses adapt and stay competitive.
The policy also outlines different sizes of parks, from nano to mega. Is this just about appealing to different sized companies, or is there like a strategic reason for these categories?
Oh, it's definitely strategic. Think of it like a tiered ecosystem they're building. So nano or tiny parks, which are under 10 acres, are perfect for startups and small businesses. Then you've got MSME parks for medium-sized companies and so on, all the way up to those huge mega parks for giant manufacturing operations.
So like building a ladder for businesses to climb as they grow.
Yeah, exactly. And where they put these parks isn't random either. The policy focuses on areas with high growth potential and where there are already industrial clusters, aiming to use those existing strengths and create a more concentrated hub of activity.
That makes sense. But let's be real, setting up these parks, no matter the size, takes a lot of money up front. What's in it for the developers?
Well, the policy offers a pretty attractive package of incentives. We're talking subsidies to offset development costs. They're exempt from certain charges like land conversion fees and stamp duty, and they have a streamlined approval process. So the faster they hit certain milestones, the faster these perks come in.
Okay, so there's real money on the table to get these parks up and running fast. But the policy also goes beyond just basic infrastructure. It talks about additional amenities and even mentions flatted factory complexes. What are those all about?
Yeah, they're a really innovative concept, especially for a country like India, where land is often limited and expensive. So basically, flatted factories are multi-story buildings designed to house smaller manufacturing units.
So instead of these big, sprawling, single-story factories, we're talking vertical factories. Yeah. What are the advantages of that, besides just saving space?
Well, it's a much more efficient use of land, for sure, but it also encourages a more collaborative environment. So think about it. Smaller businesses, maybe even in similar sectors, all under one roof, it could lead to more knowledge sharing, innovation, even joint ventures.
That's a really interesting approach, and it seems like the policy isn't just about attracting any business, it's like pushing for specific sectors.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're promoting specialized parks dedicated to everything from biotech and pharmaceuticals to electronics, renewable energy, even aerospace.
Wow, aerospace. That's not really an industry you think of when you think of India. What makes Andhra Pradesh think they can compete in such a high-tech, competitive field?
It's definitely ambitious, but they do have some things going for them. A large pool of skilled labor, available land, and access to ports are all important. Plus, the government is really investing in infrastructure specifically for aerospace, like testing facilities and training centers.
So it's not just offering incentives, it's about creating a whole environment for these industries to really succeed. But even with all those advantages, there are going to be some challenges, right?
Of course. Implementing something this big, attracting global players in such different industries, making sure development is sustainable. It's a huge undertaking, and there's no guarantee of success. And we haven't even touched on the potential social impacts.
That's exactly what I was thinking. What about the people living in these areas? How will their lives change with these massive industrial parks popping up?
Well, there are two sides to that. On the one hand, all these new industries could mean a lot of jobs, maybe boosting incomes and improving living standards for a lot of people. But then on the other...
There's always another hand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's the risk of people being displaced, having to move to make room for these parks. Right. There's also the potential for environmental damage if they don't really enforce sustainable practices. And then there's the question of whether everyone will benefit equally from this development.
Right. It's not just about making jobs, it's about making the right kind of jobs and making sure everyone has access to them. This feels like more than just an economic policy. It's like a big social experiment with huge consequences.
I think that's a great way to put it. And we don't know how this experiment will turn out.
I'm already hooked. This is way more complex than just building industrial parks. This is about changing the future of Andhra Pradesh and maybe even redefining India's role in the global economy.
And we've only just scratched the surface. We haven't even gotten to the details of how they'll manage these parks, the different models for development, or the things that could go wrong and derail the whole project.
Well, we've got a lot more to talk about then. For our listener who's totally into this, what are some of the key things they should be thinking about as we dig deeper into this policy?
Well, first, remember that this is a really big move by Andhra Pradesh, a state that hasn't really been known for manufacturing. They're aiming high, but there's no guarantee it'll work. Pay close attention to the specific industries they're going after. Biotech, aerospace, these are industries of the future, and Andhra Pradesh wants to be a leader.
And lastly,
keep in mind the potential social and environmental costs. Growing the economy is important, but it shouldn't come at the cost of people's livelihoods or the environment.
All great points. Let's look closer at how all this works in practice, starting with those different development models for these parks.
That's a great place to start. The policy actually lays out 3 different models, each with its own pros and cons. And the model they choose can have a big impact on how the park is developed and managed.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Let's dive into those models and see what they're all about.
So with these 3 models, it really comes down to who's in charge. Is it the private sector, the government, or a mix of both? It's kind of like picking a recipe. Each one has its own flavor and result.
Okay, I like that. A tasty analogy. So let's start with complete private development. What does that actually look like in real life?
It's pretty much what it sounds like. Private companies handle everything. They get the land, they build the infrastructure, manage the park, the whole thing.
So the government just takes a step back and lets the private sector run the show. What are the advantages of that?
Well, speed and efficiency are big ones. Private companies are usually a lot more agile and less bureaucratic than government agencies, so they can get things done faster. Plus, they're really motivated to make the park successful because their own profits depend on it.
But wouldn't that mean those companies might cut corners? Or like put profits ahead of things like environmental concerns or how the workers are treated?
That's a really valid concern. And that's why the policy is really clear about needing strong oversight and regulations, even in that complete private development model. So the government still sets the standards and makes sure the rules are followed, even though they aren't directly managing the project.
So it's not a complete free pass for the private companies. They still have to play by the rules.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which brings us to the second model, partial government-private partnerships. This one's more collaborative, where the government and private companies work together, each one bringing their own strengths to the table.
Sounds like a good way to balance the pros and cons of each side. How would that actually work?
Well, it could look a few different ways. The government might provide the land, some financial help, or help with regulations, while the private company takes care of construction and management. It's like a joint venture, each partner using their expertise.
But wouldn't trying to coordinate a project between the government and a private company be a total nightmare? All those meetings, all that paperwork?
You're not wrong. Public-private partnerships are famous for being complicated and sometimes messy. But when they work well, they can be really effective. It all comes down to good communication, knowing who's doing what, and having a shared vision for the project.
So it needs a good foundation of trust and working together. All right, let's move on to the third model, complete government-private development. This one sounds like the government is much more hands-on.
Right. In this model, the government is basically the project manager. They choose private developers through a bidding process and oversee the whole project to make sure it's in line with their goals.
So they're still working with private companies, but the government is calling the shots. What are the advantages of that?
It gives the government a lot more control. They can make sure that how the park is developed matches their priorities, whether that's supporting certain industries, focusing on specific areas, or making sustainability a priority.
But wouldn't that make the whole process slower and less efficient? Government bureaucracy isn't exactly known for its speed.
That's true. Government-led projects do get criticized for being slow and not adapting well to changes in the market. But there are also good things about having that level of government involvement.
Like what?
Well, for one, it can make things more transparent and accountable. When the government is directly involved, the public is watching more closely, which can help prevent corruption or things being mismanaged.
And it might also make it easier to deal with social and environmental issues.
Exactly. If the government is running the project, they can put in safeguards to protect workers' rights, minimize environmental damage, and make sure that the benefits of the development are spread more fairly.
So it seems like each model has its own trade-offs. Speed and efficiency versus control and making sure things are done right. That's a tough decision.
Yeah, it really is. And in the end, the best approach is going to depend on the specifics of each project. The government needs to weigh the pros and cons carefully and choose the model that best fits their goals and what the community needs.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about some specifics of this policy. We touched on the incentives for developers earlier, but can you give our listener a better idea of what those incentives actually look like?
Sure. The policy has a bunch of financial perks, like subsidies, to help cover the costs of building infrastructure. So that means the government is actually helping pay for things like roads, power lines, water systems, all the essential infrastructure needed to get these parks working.
And what about being exempt from certain charges? Can you give our listener a real-world example of what that would mean?
Let's say you're a developer who just got a huge piece of land for a megapark. Normally in India, you'd have to pay a land conversion charge to change how the land is classified, from agricultural to industrial use. But this policy waives that charge, which saves developers a ton of money.
Wow, that's huge. Any other examples?
They're also exempt from stamp duty, which is a tax on legal documents, and registration fees. It all adds up to a pretty sweet deal.
So it's not just about giving out money, right? The policy also talks about streamlining the approval process. What does that mean in real life?
It means cutting through all that bureaucratic red tape that often slows down big projects in India. The policy sets up a single desk portal, which is basically a one-stop shop online where developers can submit all their applications and track their progress.
So no more running around from one government office to another trying to get approvals and permits. That alone could save developers months, even years.
Exactly. And time is money, especially when you're trying to develop things quickly. The faster these parks are up and running, the sooner they can start attracting businesses and boosting the economy.
Okay, so there are clear financial and bureaucratic perks to get developers on board. But what about the environment? We talked about zero liquid discharge earlier, but how will this policy make sure that these parks are developed in a sustainable way?
That's a really important question. The policy has specific environmental safeguards, especially for industries that are known for their potential impact, like textiles and leather. Zero liquid discharge is a big one because it requires companies to treat and reuse all their wastewater within the park. That cuts down on pollution and reduces how much water they use.
So instead of wastewater being dumped into rivers or polluting the surrounding area, it's treated and used again within the park. That's pretty amazing.
It's a tough goal, but it can be done. And the policy also pushes for other sustainable practices, like using renewable energy sources, building green buildings, and preserving green spaces within the parks.
So it's not just about attracting businesses and creating jobs, it's about doing it in a way that's good for the environment.
Exactly. The goal is to create a model for sustainable industrial development that helps both the economy and the environment.
This all sounds really good, but let's be real. Putting a policy this big into action is a huge undertaking, and there are bound to be some roadblocks. What are some of the things that could go wrong and derail this ambitious project?
Well, getting land is always a big issue in India. Convincing people to give up their land for industrial development can take a long time and be really complicated, often leading to legal battles and social unrest.
And that's connected to the potential for conflict, right?
Absolutely. If people feel like they're being treated unfairly or that they're not benefiting from the development, it could lead to protests and even violence.
So dealing with those social dynamics, making sure everyone feels like they're being heard and respected is really important. What else could go wrong?
Corruption is always a risk, especially with big infrastructure projects. There's a lot of money involved. And if there isn't enough transparency and accountability, there's always a chance that some of that money could end up in the wrong hands.
So keeping a close eye on how the money is being spent and making sure the bidding processes are fair and open is going to be essential. What about environmental risks? Are there still concerns, even with the safeguards built into the policy?
Definitely. Even with the best of intentions, enforcing environmental regulations can be tough. There's always a chance that companies might try to cut corners, or that government officials might look the other way when rules are broken, maybe in exchange for bribes.
So having strong enforcement and independent monitoring is going to be critical. This is starting to feel like a really high-stakes game with a lot of moving pieces.
It is. And the stakes are really high, not just for Andhra Pradesh, but for all of India. If this project is successful, it could transform the state's economy and make India a major player in global manufacturing. But if it fails,
The consequences could be really bad, not just for the economy, but for society and politics as well.
exactly. The whole world is watching to see if Andhra Pradesh can pull this off.
I'm already feeling the pressure, and I'm just a podcast host. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about some of the specific industries they're targeting, starting with that unexpected push into aerospace.
That's a great place to start. It's a bold move, but not completely out of nowhere. India's aerospace industry is growing, and the government sees it as a sector with huge potential.
Okay, let's get into the specifics of why Andhra Pradesh thinks they can compete in this really competitive field. So we talked about the policies, big goals, and some potential challenges, but for our listener who's really digging into this, what are the things that will make or break Andhra Pradesh's success in aerospace?
Well, you can think of it like building a jet engine. You need all the right pieces working perfectly together. So first, you need skilled labor to build aircraft. You need highly trained people. And Andhra Pradesh needs to make sure they have enough engineers, technicians, and skilled workers to meet the demand.
So just having a big population isn't enough. It's about having people with the right skills.
Exactly. And that means putting money into education and training programs, maybe even working with schools and organizations from other countries to get more expertise.
Okay, so what else is super important?
Infrastructure is key. You need special facilities like manufacturing plants, testing labs, even airstrips, all designed specifically for the aerospace industry. Andhra Pradesh has some work to do there.
So it's not just about turning farmland into industrial parks, it's about creating a whole system from scratch.
Exactly. And don't forget about the supply chain to be competitive. Andhra Pradesh can't just get aircraft manufacturers. They also need the companies that supply all the parts, materials, and services that go into building an airplane.
So it's about making a whole network of connected industries, not just isolated factories.
Exactly. And then there's the regulations. The aerospace industry is very regulated with tough safety and quality standards.
Yeah.
Andhra Pradesh needs to create rules that are both strict and good for business, something that makes sure things are safe, but also helps innovation.
That's a tough balance to strike. So for a company like Boeing or Airbus to even think about setting up in Andhra Pradesh, they need to see all these things coming together.
Absolutely. It's a long shot, but not impossible. If Andhra Pradesh can show they're serious about making a world-class aerospace hub, they might just surprise everyone.
It's almost like a David and Goliath story with this up-and-coming state challenging the giants of the aerospace industry. Okay, let's move on to another industry. The policy highlights biotechnology. What's behind this focus on biotech?
India already has a strong pharmaceutical industry, and the government sees biotech as the next big thing they're looking to build on their strengths in things like drug discovery, clinical trials, and manufacturing to become a global leader in biotech.
So they want to take what they're already good at and go even further.
Exactly. And Andhra Pradesh has some specific advantages in this area. They have a lot of scientific talent, a network of research institutions, and it's relatively cheap to do business there.
But how do they compare to other biotech hubs like Boston or San Francisco?
Well, they have a ways to go, but they're making progress. The government is investing in new research facilities, giving tax breaks to biotech companies and making it easier to do clinical trials.
So they're trying to make things more attractive for biotech companies.
Right. And they're focusing on specific parts of biotech, like genomics, personalized medicine, and agricultural biotech. They're not trying to do everything. They're picking areas where they think they can really stand out.
Okay, so they have a plan, some advantages, and they're putting resources behind it. But like we said before, making it happen is what matters. What are the biggest challenges they face in actually making this biotech dream a reality?
Well, one challenge is getting and keeping top talent. The competition for skilled biotech people is global, and Andhra Pradesh needs to offer good salaries and benefits to attract the best and brightest.
So it's not enough to just build labs and offer tax breaks. They need to create a place where scientists and researchers actually want to live and work.
That means spending money on things that make life good schools, affordable housing, cultural attractions, a community that's lively and welcoming.
It sounds like they're trying to build a whole ecosystem, not just a bunch of biotech companies. What other challenges are there?
Getting money is another big one. Biotech is a risky business, but it can pay off big, but it needs a lot of investment up front. Andhra Pradesh needs to create a stronger system of venture capital to fund startups and new companies.
So it's not just about government funding, it's about creating a whole network of private investors who are willing to take a chance on these innovative companies.
Exactly. And finally, there's the issue of protecting intellectual property. Biotech companies rely on patents and trade secrets to protect their inventions. Andhra Pradesh needs to make sure their laws and regulations protect intellectual property so companies feel confident investing and innovating.
It sounds like they're trying to make a mini Silicon Valley for biotech in India.
That's a big goal. But it might just work if they can handle these challenges and create a truly world-class biotech scene. They could become a major force in global biotechnology.
It's awesome to see Andhra Pradesh making these bold moves, trying to become a leader in these cutting-edge industries. But let's zoom out for a minute. How do these efforts fit into India's bigger economic strategy?
India wants to be a global manufacturing superpower. They're trying to move from being mainly a service economy to one that's also a big player in manufacturing.
So they don't want to just be the world's back office. They want to be making things, coming up with new ideas, competing on a global scale.
That's right. And they see Andhra Pradesh as a key part of that plan. They're hoping to make a model that other states can copy, starting a manufacturing boom across the country.
It's a big vision, but it's facing some challenges. The global economy is slowing down, competition is tough, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. How confident are you that India can actually do this?
It's definitely a tough time to be making this push. But India has some things working in its favor. They have a young and growing population, a big domestic market, and a government that's focused on economic reforms.
So they have the right ingredients, but there's no guarantee it'll work.
Exactly. It depends on how well they put these policies into practice, how they deal with changes in the global economy, and if they can get the talent and investment they need to be competitive.
So for our listener who's been with us on this deep dive, what are the most important things to remember as they follow this story?
First, remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Changing an economy takes time, years, even decades of constant effort and investment.
So patience is key.
Absolutely. Second, pay attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. India's success also depends on things they can't control, like global trade technology and what happens in geopolitics.
So it's not just about India, it's about the whole world.
Right. And last, don't underestimate the power of ideas. India is betting big on innovation and technology to drive their economic growth. If they can create a culture of entrepreneurship and encourage creativity, they might just shock the world.
Well, I think we've covered a ton today. We looked at the details of this policy, analyzed the good and the bad, and dove into the specific industries Andhra Pradesh is going after. What's your final thought for our listener as they think about all this information?
I think the important thing is to remember this story is still being written. We don't know how it'll end, but the stakes are high. Andhra Pradesh is making a big bet on the future, and the world is watching to see if it pays off.
It's a story full of ambition, challenges, and potential, and we'll be here to keep you updated. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.